I did need to sort of take that time off to kind of heal my bruises. And through that whole process, I felt so bad and guilty and like I'd failed everybody. I had this feeling like no matter what anyone told me, okay, yeah, the market was hard, but if I was good enough, we could have made this work. Like if I had been able to figure it out, if I was a good enough game director, I could have, like the design would have taken off. If I was a good enough business leader, we could have figured this out.
Is everything over? Shall we give up on the gaming industry now? Shall we stop trying making games, building studios and companies that have the power to positively impact the future lives of millions of players, professional and humans? No, we don't. In this special track of Rise and Play, I will be focusing on the unspoken topics around building game companies, founders teams, fundraising, pitching, rebounding after closing your studio, company, or losing your job, by bringing guests who are going through the same storm of 2024 like you, and keep fighting. I will also share openly my own process, trials and error, and step-by-step building the new game company Killen as the first-time CEO of a game company. I believe we are stronger together, and we don't have to go through the storm alone, because at Rise and Play, we are not alone. Oh, and one last thing, as you feel supercharged by listening to this episode, it will mean a lot to me, and if you haven't done it yet, that you hit the follow button. It will help with the discovery of the show so other people can benefit from the content too. Thanks, and now let's get to the episode. So hi, welcome to a new episode of Rise and Play. And for the context, I came back from GDC and I caught up with many founders, but I wanted to catch up since the COVID time. So it was a pleasure to catch up with some of them. And a topic that has been very difficult and I didn't have so much content about it is what happens when you have to close studios and what happens after you close a studio. Because especially these days, we read a lot about layoffs, studios closing. Some are public announcements, some are not even public announcement. I even had a news today about one. I've been an investor actually in that studio and they have to announce that they had to close. And I think there are a lot of learnings, also a lot of personal stories and nuances from the founders that are not always going through the PR of the announcement. So I want to give a space and the voice for the founders who want to share their stories, the journey for them. And today we're covering Double Loop Games, and I'm super pleased to have with us Shelby Moledina. I was catching up with her at GDC and we talked about it, just, catching up in a friendly way. And I'm so grateful that Shelby offers like, you know what, let's just do the podcast. I want to express about it. And here we are. So thanks, Shelby, for joining for the podcast today.
Thank you, Sophie. It's really good to see you again. I really enjoyed our catch up at GDC and I'm really honored to be on your show.
To begin, if you can maybe share the context of how the Loop game started, the context, maybe the whole journey of fundraising, how far you've been, and then we can get more into questions. But, your background before, what have you done in games before?
So I've been in games over 20 years. I started as an intern in college. After college, I went to a non-game startup because at that time there were no games jobs. And then I was lucky enough to come back to Eugene, Oregon and work for Pipeworks Software for about 8 years. When I was at Pipeworks, we were on a work for hire basis. We worked on many huge licensed games, Rampage, Godzilla, Night at the Museum, Zumba. And I learned a lot about juggling a lot of projects. I learned a lot about the business top to bottom. I started as an engineer and I became a designer and I became a producer. And that kind of started me on my journey of being able to start learning about the entire games business, top to bottom and inside and out, how to manage cross-functional teams. And it was great. So after I was there about 8 years, I moved to San Francisco and I spent a year or so at DNA West, which is a Japanese-owned mobile free-to-play company. And that year was like my free-to-play boot camp. We launched 30 games in 30 weeks and I got to work really closely with real experts in the field. And I had an amazing mentor and I just learned so much about it and learned to really love mobile. Then I went to Warner Brothers and I led the central product management team in publishing, where I got to work with all of the studios at Warner Brothers Games. Started with the mobile studios like NetherRealm, and I got to work really closely with them and develop relationships. My goal in working with these studios was to help them with their live ops planning and understanding mobile monetization and how to run events and things like that. So they had amazing games, and I just came in and sort of helped them understand how to level them up a bit. And then on the next round, helped with the pre-production planning. But I missed really being on the studio game development side. So I moved back to the studio side at Warner Brothers. I went on maternity leave in 2018. And when I came back to Warner Brothers, things had changed. The business organization was different. The needs were different. And it didn't really seem like a great fit for me. I was extremely sleep deprived with my new baby, and Warner Brothers was really flexible and supportive of that. So I'm really grateful. But I did sort of struggle with feeling really connected to the projects and really feeling like it was clear to me what I wanted to be doing there. So around that time, Emily Greer, she's a friend I knew through the game events that I know you through, that sort of thing. So I knew her socially for a long time. She started talking to me about how she was thinking about starting a game studio. And she wanted to start a game studio that made mobile games for people who don't consider themselves to be gamers, but really are, because they're spending quite a few hours a week playing games, but they're really underserved as far as meaningful social. It does happen to, as we moved along, we refined our vision to really focus on women, but that wasn't necessarily where we started from the beginning. We were, starting from a point of being really inclusive, not targeting hardcore self-identified gamers, a pretty broad market. So we had never worked together. We knew each other socially. So we put ourselves into a summer of co-founder dating before she, proposed at one E3, like, do you want to start this company with me? And that was really awesome. But during that summer, we spent a lot of time talking about our values and what types of games we believe there's an opportunity for. We tried to do as many cycles of real discussion and even some conflict, not conflict as far as like arguing, but conflict as far as we didn't have the same view and we needed to talk that out. And we felt pretty good after that 3-month summer of part-time co-founder dating that we were really aligned as far as values and who we wanted to make games for. And like I said, we knew each other socially, so we had some idea that we were aligned, but it was really important that we dig into the nitty-gritty. And I had never started a company before. Emily had. She had gone through the fundraising process. And before talking to Emily, I felt like I would never start a company because I knew the games business top to bottom. I can produce and manage and design and all of the things, but I didn't know how to fundraise. I didn't know any of that. So pairing up with her gave me a lot of confidence that we could do it. She had a lot of experience on the business side and publishing and fundraising, but had not personally worked on a dev team making a game before. So there was a pretty natural split for us in our roles. And part of what we did that summer was kind of flesh that out. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, thanks. A lot of context I would like to pose on some points, but that gives a very good background. So what I call pivotal moments, because a lot in my interview, I asked what was the triggering point of making you considering founding a company. I talked to many founders and especially women and mothers. I have the same with Emily Yim, actually, that's mentioned the same timing, coming back from a maternity leave. So I guess some realization happened. I think there was also Audrey and others like Caroline, Marshall, many. I think there's something really happening where you see your priorities and how maybe you want to live life. And then that's just non-negotiable. Like, okay, I'm going to do my own thing, having flexibility of my time. So I see definitely some common patterns. Does that resonate to you as well, that realization? Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. I believe that. You're right. I hadn't heard a lot about that. That pattern makes sense to me if it hits at the right time for you in your career. So I've had 2 babies, and on my first maternity leave, that was when I was at Pipeworks, and I came back to work afterward. And I did have coworkers who later told me that they had taken bets on whether I would return or not, which didn't feel so good when I heard about that. So I did go back to my job. I didn't know about that part of it until much later. So I think there's a common stereotype about women not going back to work at all after maternity leave that men are sort of afraid of or see this stereotype. But I think what you're talking about is really resonating with me because I don't want to stay home 24/7 with my baby, but I do want to have a life that is very intentional, because every minute that you spend not with your baby or your family, you want to feel like that time's not being wasted. And after my latest maternity leave in 2019, when I came back, that feeling that I wasn't sure where I fit and what project I could really care about, that really was a factor in making sure that the time I was spending was very valuable to me and to the world.
Yeah. And that's really the similar explanation about how meaningful the time, like purposeful, is like, it's interesting how at times with, when you think, oh, you're doing so much already as a mother, like why building a company? And I've seen the opposite actually. I think you verbalize it very well. I want every minute to matter when I'm not with my baby and then you think really, is this really my place or what I really want to do? And that's how I heard the story of other women who founded the company, align deeply with their values and what they believed to live fully, to the core of who they are, even if they were mothers with very young child.
That makes a lot of sense. And I would say that it was definitely more about purpose rather than control over my time, because starting a company ended up being more time consuming and soul consuming than any regular job I'd had in the past. So I didn't believe going into it that I would be able to work part-time or anything like that. But it was really about the intentionality of doing something that I believed in with my time.
Yeah. You were not the only studio founded at the time, but wanted to really crack of pushing the boundaries further, or what would be a game or a company designed with a lens as a woman, and then building really for an audience who doesn't consider themselves as gamers. So I will name some of the studio at the time. Again, the Emily Im studio, Super Bloom, really around the design, lifestyle. So majority female audience. Papukaya also at the time, one of the studios of Supercell with Drusilla Orlando. Also was going for an audience, like broader audience who don't see themselves as gamers. So it was very inspiring to see at that time several studios led by women to really go deep from the beginning, the DNA. But I still believe that the need is there. It's still there, right? So when you look at how a studio is built, how you approach team building, how you approach the development, the details in the game, it makes a big difference just by the composition of the team. So you were part of a bigger movement, but you were not the only one seeing that, as women, as developers building the companies.
Yes. I also feel like there was a big movement at that time and since then to really expand the definition of who is playing games and to recognize that there aren't these really hard boundaries between who's playing games and who's not. Games have really become part of many of our daily lives in tiny little check-ins when we're standing in line somewhere or sitting down and playing a longer game, like after my kids go to bed. And so it's not just the people who've been playing games for the last 20 years, it's new people as well. And so there's a really big market for that. And the games that have been made so far, not all, but many of them have been really optimized around a specific segment of players, but don't really capture the needs of the rest. And I think there are a lot of people who looked at that and thought, rightly so, I still believe in this, that there are just so many players who are being underserved by highly competitive, sort of domination-based games. However, the challenge of building for this wider market is that the known patterns need to be expanded, experimented, broken, and there's a lot of risk in that. And when you pair it with the current, especially mobile market, where finding players is way more expensive than it used to be, and the incumbents can really outspend you. They can outspend anybody, but by just throwing $50 million at advertising and pushing you out of the market.
Mm-hmm.
So there is this giant underserved market, but accessing them is really challenging. And I think all the different ways these companies have gone about that has been really fascinating.
Mm-hmm. And we'll get into that because indeed there's the vision where we are really at the vision stage. And then there's the execution and also execution in the context, right? So when you started around 2020, we are in 2024. I mean, last year, 2023, many things changed quickly. Also, I remember even working on the merge game with the CPI going 10x within 12 months. It was just crazy. It's like, okay, what do we do now? Where our development was not going that fast. But yeah, let's spend a bit more time on the start of a founding team. I'm going through also the funding of my own company since end of last year, the grooming, making of a founding team. I think that's the most important team to build from the beginning. And so you shared also how you've met with Emily. I think an important aspect you mentioned is the complementary of skills and clear roles and responsibility. So maybe more concretely, I'd like to hear how you started actually the whole first phase of founding journey, or if were you even prototyping, like the seed, and how did you divide the role, responsibility, and your ways of working? Were you working even together on site or remotely?
I'm sure. Happy to share all of that. So at the very beginning, Emily and I would meet up at her apartment and work at her dining table. That's where we did a lot of early discussions. Pretty early on, our very first employee was an engineer named Min who had worked with Emily before and kind of said, Emily, wherever you go, I want to come there too. And I didn't know him, but we got on the phone and we just immediately really bonded over the types of games we wanted to make. And he's a really amazing hard worker. And I didn't know it at the time, but he also is really talented at taking a game idea and figuring out how to prototype it and make it fun. That's actually a really undervalued or under-recognized skill, I think. I've had many ideas in the past I've brought to a prototype engineer who kind of put it together to the letter of what I said, but it wasn't quite working. Whereas Min was really key to this quick talking and prototyping and his really innate sense of, oh, that's a great idea. What if I make this pulse in this way so it'll be a little clearer? Like he could just along the way make those sorts of recommendations. And we had a really awesome cycle. We made something like 27 prototypes to start with.
Wow.
And it was amazing. And where we started was at that time when we started, Merge Dragons had come out. I was playing a ton of Merge Dragons, of course, other puzzle games. I really loved Merge. And I felt like there was a lot of opportunity there. I want to say there weren't any clones. There may have been a couple of clones of Merge Dragons to start. Merge Mansion and the whole Merge 2 genre had not even cracked the market or been seen before at that time. Yeah. So the direction we went, I loved Merge. We started evolving a novel Merge mechanic. And the first thing we did was those 27 prototypes with Min, me designing, Emily very involved with the discussions. One of Emily's roles was to represent the player because she wasn't a hands-on game developer in the past. She does tend to like the types of games that we were building. So we tried to, in some ways, involve her, but also insulate her, so she wasn't kind of drinking the same Kool-Aid that we were drinking about our ideas, so that when she would see it, it'd be somewhat fresh. You could never totally insulate. So that was always kind of like a balancing act we did through the whole life of Double Loop, involving Emily, but also keeping her a little bit objective so she could give that sort of feedback. So what we did was we evolved this novel merge mechanic that was a merge mechanic, but kind of like match 3 as well. Mm-hmm. And on this kind of final prototype, we felt like our criteria were being met. And those criteria were, it's fun. I enjoyed playing it. I want to play more. Also, then from my point of view as the game maker, can I tune this? Can I create many interesting levels out of this? Is there something here to build on? Can I create new power-ups in the future? What you don't want is a mechanic that is really fun, but really limited, and you can never sort of expand it in live operations later. So I was looking forward on that. Once we had our core puzzle mechanic, around that time, we started looking for our art director. And our art director was Graham Fratsky, who had worked at Zynga on a bunch of Farmville games and a bunch of other things. He had a lot of expertise in the audience we were making for. And he's one of the only founding members of our team that either Emily or I didn't already know. And he was such a wonderful gem of a find. And we did, of course, know people in common who vouched for him. But that core team of Emily, me, Min, and Graham, those days were sort of magical. It was like September 2019 until March of 2020 when, the hammer dropped. So it was the 4 of us in the office and going on these walks and having game design talks and thinking about the future and talking about our company. And that was really a magical time. And one thing I think Emily and I were both aware of, something I've experienced, is that every single thing you do in the early days of your company end up in some way being kind of solidified and expressed in your company's culture. So we were all really intentional about how much documentation are we doing, the right amount, enough to keep ourselves organized. We're not just throwing things out willy-nilly and not documenting, but not doing so much it hindered us, and things like that. And of course, values, and that we were hiring and thinking about a really collaborative team that was not about ego. And so every single hire we did, we made sure that we were really in alignment with those values. And we'll get there, but I'm really proud of the culture we ended up being able to build with the 20 people as we added people very intentionally along the way. And one other thing about that early phase, while we were building those prototypes, that's when Emily had bootstrapped the company herself with some funds, plus angel investors who came along and wanted to invest in whatever she did. At that point, we didn't have a deck or a prototype or anything. As we got further along and solidified our pillars, that's when we started meeting with investors. That was around fall, winter of 2019. And we raised our seed round led by London Venture Partners. And they've been an amazing partner since the beginning. And that gave us the funding to start building toward a bigger vertical slice. Until then, we just had our little kind of like programmer art core slice. So that's how we started.
That's amazing to hear here. And I think it's still a good practice, especially these days, because I'm involved in workshops coaching founders. And the main place where everyone needs help is, how do I fundraise? How do I pitch for the next? So I think it's a good reminder. What can you do today to keep making progress? Because you didn't have that money. I mean, you did have some money initially, but far enough to not think too far, where you would build something, figure things out, consolidate the team, the vision, even the ways of working, which I find, like putting my investor hat, I would do that at lower cost at the beginning, and not like, okay, here are your 5 million and just go race and make all the mistakes in an expensive way. So that's nice to hear as well, that practice. So maybe to clarify, I hope I understand it well, that you were really owning the game development part fully.
Yes.
And Emily also from her background, so maybe more around the data, the market, business and fundraising. And so what was the journey when you said that you raised the seed? What happened at that time when you had closed your seed round? And how was that second phase then, after your bootstrapping magical phase, early phase?
Yes, you've got that right. So Emily and I, at a high level, split fundraising, business, publishing, and also analytics, hands-on analytics work on Emily's side. And then I was running all aspects of the game development. So I was the game director. When we were small, I was the designer, project manager, product strategist, all of those things, on top of doing the company sort of pillar stuff. But between those things, Emily and I always consulted with each other really closely. It is really important to have clear ownership so that things don't fall through the cracks. But it's also important that everyone shares the vision and that you've got someone to bounce those ideas off of. That was really key. So after we closed our seed round, we started looking to expand the team slightly. And we hired another engineer who we brought on to help us expand into the vertical slice of the game. We started planning for what the future full game would look like, but we did, again, hold ourselves to really strict criteria before we would move past that first extra hire. So before we went on beyond 5 people, we wanted to make sure that our vertical slice included the core puzzle and then also a slice of the meta game, which in our game, that first game was a hybrid merge puzzle and then merge farming meta game. We built that vertical slice with, again, a very small team, one more engineer. We still were hacking quite a bit. And I believe strongly that everything in the prototype phase, you should be ready to toss it at the end. Like, maybe we'll keep some of the code, but be emotionally ready to throw it all away. So there was stuff from that time that lived on after that, concept art and things like that. But we did take that vertical slice and of that full kind of 3 days of gameplay where you had puzzles and then you would go back to the farm and you could buy your chickens and merge your chickens up and they would become cute, hilarious, weird chickens and things like that. And that was great. And we took that and we did a lot of playtesting. A really expensive way to make mistakes is to grow your team too fast. And I've seen that where there's pressure at whatever company to move out of the pre-production gate because there's a date, because you've got all these people waiting. And that's really expensive because then you move into production, maybe your foundation's not solid and you are then burning and wasting a ton of time. It's much harder to pivot when you're big. I'm not saying we did everything perfectly, but that was the goal, was to keep it small and be sure about our foundations before we started growing. So in March 2020, we all went home, thought it was a couple weeks. It was not. We let our month-to-month office lease go. We went fully remote. So the 4 of us at that time, we started building our sort of remote culture, which ended up being amazing and wonderful, like very silly things with backgrounds. And I don't know, the Zoom backgrounds became a big culture thing. It was very funny. Like we always did weird ones for people's birthdays. It was like something I did once for Graham and then it became a thing. And it's always really, we had a lot of fun. We always tried to make our Zoom meetings be like chatty and connective as well as efficient. So we left space for that. Over that summer, 2020, we started hiring a few more people, like another artist and a few other people who, it was very strange. We had never met them in person. I've never hired anybody that I had never met in person until that summer. And now I'm very used to it. But at that time we were like, oh, what is this going to be like? Is it going to work? And it did work. We kept building more of the vertical slice and initial content and testing and playtesting. And then about a year after our seed round, that's when we were pitching for our Series A, when we were ready to go into full production. And we were sure about what we were building. We were sure about the market. We had our core team, but not a massive team. And that was the first time I think either Emily or I had ever really done fundraising entirely over Zoom. It was very strange to not be going down to the VC's offices and stuff. Yeah, it was strange. Our partners, London Venture Partners, who are our partners on our seed round, I really can't say enough good things about them. David Gardner and Ari and really everybody I met there, they were so supportive and so helpful. There were a couple of things they did for us that were amazing. One was just us being connected to the outside world when it was really easy to feel really isolated during the beginning of COVID, and having them to reach out to, and they had their networks as well. But for me, a meaningful thing was meeting other studio game director founders, specifically designers that I could bounce ideas off of in a safe way, because we're all part of the same investment portfolio. So we trust each other. That was really important. And one thing I had lost from moving from a giant company like Warner Brothers to a startup is that at Warner Brothers and previous places I've been, I always had this giant multi-studio network of people to talk to. I was never a designer like on my own. That was the most amazing thing I built at Warner Brothers, was by going to all the studios I made friends and network everywhere, and I could bounce things off. And so now as a solo studio, we grew the team, and I had lots of people who knew in our team. They were all extremely experienced, great people to discuss with, but I didn't have another designer on the team to bounce things off of. So talking to people that were trusted and safe and introduced to us, that was really helpful to me in helping to solve some of my design issues that I wasn't solving just sitting by myself in a room. One thing that was really helpful was we got a pitching coach for our Series A.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know if it was a thing even.
I know. I can get his name for you. He was great. So my normal style for presentations and discussions is that I do well a little bit off the cuff when we're talking about things that I know. It's more natural than a practiced speech. So I was a little reluctant to go into it with this practiced speech approach. But he was amazing because he heard us tell our stories together. And then he worked with each of us individually to sort of help us with an objective eye, pull out parts of those that were really relevant and to highlight those and to say more of this, less of that. And I was so apprehensive going into it, but it made our pitching so much better. It kind of affected our deck, but it was mostly in how I think Emily and I talked about the company and what we chose to talk about and what was just sort of fluff not to get into. So that really helped us. And that round was led by Hero, and they also became amazing partners for us as we grew the company after that.
Great stories. And I want to follow up on the fundraising journey here, which is also tied to the development, because 2024, different investment environment, recovery, I'd say, from a time that was maybe more generous with how investment were done in games, a lot of excitement, maybe not with that same type of diligence. So could you tell us what did you have produced at the time of seed round and the Series A? And I can give you also the insights of what I've heard as well, what is needed these days for seed and Series A, just for comparison.
I have been thinking a lot about that. It was really different in 2020 versus 2024. And I'll back up and say every year that I've been in games, the bar has gotten higher. For fundraising, for success with your game, it's more and more expensive to find players. All of the things get more expensive and more difficult. And so in 2019, we did feel like, oh, this is much harder than it was 4 or 5 years ago. But now here we are 4 or 5 years later, and it's now harder than it was then. And it just sort of keeps going that way, which is really, really hard. I want to talk about a newsletter I read. David Kay, who's a friend of mine, he wrote a newsletter. Looks like it came out March 29th. It was right after GDC. And it really expressed all of this really well. So I would say look that up. He talked specifically about how at the time that we fundraised in 2019, 2020, we had a deck for our initial seed discussions. We did have a prototype and a plan, and we had market research, but we didn't have our game. We had some playtests. We didn't have real market data on our game. We needed the money to build the game. David's point and advice for fundraising now, which I believe in, is that the bar now for fundraising at that level is that you have to already demonstrate some market fit. So if I were to start a game company now, I would be thinking about it very differently than what we did. I would figure out ways to go very directly to the players and the market, probably with more inexpensive initial team members, just to get that initial fit. And there are different ways to do it. Another company, a friend of mine, Andrew Bell, started a company called Big Run Games, and they've done an amazing job of going. He also left Warner Brothers and started his own thing. And they went straight to initially making games on skills where they were making money back right away. And they were making money 2 years before we were making money because of their approach. It was a tinier game, but it was a really good way to start. I think that sort of scrappiness is where you need to be now, and that they would not fund a company based on a deck and a prototype. I do want to say, however, though, having a repeat founder in your founding team will help you get over a lot of those hurdles. It's not quite as hard as, what we're talking about when you have somebody like Emily who has had a successful company. She ran for many years, successful exits, actually multiple exits. So a lot of times people are investing in someone like that, plus my experience, but I had not proven myself as a founder at that point. So if you have that kind of secret weapon, that can help you get past some of that. But I would definitely agree that the hurdles are higher now. You need to prove market fit. So I would think about that. How do we get to that? How do we get to a live market? One other thing that changed in our mindset that would help us be more scrappy and direct that way, when we started Double Loop, I had many years of experience with the App Store and Google Play saying, you can't release in the United States early. You can't soft launch in the United States, or you have no chance of getting featured. And later, halfway through the time at Double Loop, we spoke with them and they had changed. They were saying, it's fine. You could do these soft launch tests here. They're not as strict as they were on that. So jumping ahead a tiny bit, on our second game, we did our initial soft launch in the United States. We went straight to the actual metric instead of spending a year in soft launch, kind of like hopscotching around the world to get closer to our metrics, which is what we had done for many years.
Very good insights. And you're correct. That's more of the environment today. So for VC, just not having to take a risk and just taking the shortcuts, like what is the traction of a market fit you have, and then the strength of your team, which is by track record or what have you done before. So different expectation for different time. Let's fast forward then. I know there's a lot of tests that happen in the company. I'd actually played your game in soft launch because we were quite far in development of Plantopia and we were exploring all the games in soft launch with merge mechanics. I was like, look at the game. And I remember the merging of a chicken. It was super cute. And so we were sharing in the team. So the last 6 months or 12 months before you realized the decision of closing the company, what happened? Where were you in development? What was the team situation and the context? If you could walk us through that time.
Sure thing. I think I would have to back up about a year before the end of the company. In the fall of 2022, we were about a year into soft launch on Puzzle Farm, that game that we were just talking about, the merge puzzle and farming game. By that point, we had built our backend and our tech and our engine, and we built our team. We were probably about 18 core team members at that time. And we were in soft launch looking at our metrics and saying, okay, we're almost there. These are good metrics. They're not quite sustainable metrics, but we think we can get there. And we did that for about a year. And that's really hard because you might think some of the data might be wrong. It might be part an audience segment. Like I said earlier, we were hopscotching around the world. So we were kind of trying to triangulate. So it took us about a year to get to the decision of, okay, this Puzzle Farm, we've put everything we can into it. It is not going to be a studio sustaining hit. We need to pivot. And so there was that fall of 2022, Emily and I and the leadership team spent a lot of time together talking about what that meant. And, there were discussions of like, should we change anything about the team structure or size? Should we try to do another farming game? So we involved the team as well. We did some interesting things when we decided to pause Puzzle Farm. We gave everyone about a week of just mental, emotional reset. Then we planned a game jam, which was purely for fun, but to get our creative juices going. In the background, Emily and I were doing all kinds of business and strategy things, but we also had the team doing a game jam that was really fun. So they got to use anything from the Puzzle Farm engine and assets that they wanted. It didn't have to be a feature that was going to go into the game. It was just work together. And what we did was we assigned groups, 3-person teams that were cross-functional that hadn't worked with each other very closely before. And they came out with some amazing things. Like one of them took the Puzzle Farm cute assets and made this zombie farming shoot 'em up game out of it. It was hilarious. And like the main character was very creepy. And then another one did some social features that we were like, whoa, that's actually really interesting. Let's keep that. So it was kind of both. Both things came out of it, got creative juices going. Then we split the team into 2 prototype teams as we started exploring what our pivot would be. Can we adjust Puzzle Farm to a point where it's a big enough swing that we think it's worth another shot? And through that exploration, really felt like, okay, if we're going to make a significant change here, it's going to basically be a new game. There's almost no savings in kind of basing off of Puzzle Farm. So then I backed up and we started looking at where's the market. And by that point, Merge 2 games had started to appear. Merge Mansion was the first and the most successful so far, but some other ones, Travel Town and a bunch of other ones. And again, like I said, I'm a real fan of Merge games. And we built a whole bunch of institutional knowledge about how do you build mergeable puzzle pieces where you can tell that they're part of the same chain, but they're distinct from each other. And that's harder than you would think. Don't ever try to make merge chains of pumpkins. They're impossible to distinguish. So we kind of were looking at team strength and market, and really through a whole bunch of research and discussion and talking, decided that the Merge 2 market was really promising, that it was the only spot we really saw in the mobile market where the market was growing, but it also wasn't fully calcified with a bunch of incumbents. There were games in that segment that had a lot of promise, but were not initially built to be live operated and have social features. So we had our strategy and our reason. We did a lot of research. We did a big official study with Solstin, who, I'll recommend forever. They're amazing. Like one of the most concretely helpful research studies that I've ever seen on a games audience. And we used it all the time. So they have a dashboard where we had them research the Merge 2 audience, and it went really into depth about their motivations, the types of media they liked. So from there, of course, you can't just make a data-driven game. We like to think of ourselves as data-informed, not data-driven. So we looked at their top 50 shows and really talked through, like, what do we think? And we kind of triangulated on a few options. Like we really saw they really liked investigation things, like police procedural investigations, as well as paranormal investigation, like Buffy and a bunch of things like that. They liked hospital shows. They liked a few other things. So we went and did our own concept testing to see what resonated, and we came around to deciding that between what's resonating and wanted by the audience, what we think can be expandable in live ops and viable, and also what we are passionate about, we decided to do a paranormal investigation Merge 2 narrative game. And at that point, we also had built a bunch of narrative experience, and we all are passionate about narrative. So we hit go on that about December 2022. And at that time, because we had our engine in place and our team really trusted and really worked well together, a lot of momentum, we were able to build our second game and get it to soft launch. And that game was called Ashco. We got that one to soft launch in about 5 months. And our first vertical slice was in like 2 weeks. Wow. And, all these things were very accelerated, and we were able to get to soft launch. And like I said, we did a quick tech test in the Philippines, but then we went straight to the US to see our metrics. That was around May-ish. We knew exactly how much runway we had left. And all this is going on. When you're a founder, you've also got so many other threads going on besides what's happening with the game. So we were building this, but Emily and I and the leadership team were still working on a lot of pitches for this game that we were doing, but also for big licensed IP games that we felt there was a big market for. We had a pretty big IP agreement, and we were looking for funding, whether it was publishing or more VC type of investment. And we were doing that pitching process 18 hours a day at GDC 2023. And we came out of it feeling a lot of promise and a lot of interest. But as you and a lot of people have seen in that time, it went from a place of feeling tight but possible to, by the time we got to the fall, it was impossible for us. Every discussion that we had taken all the way to the point of executive greenlight at 3 pretty major companies and serious conversations, they got to that point, and then the words were different, but the theme was the same, that everyone who was in charge of investing money at that time was being conservative and only spending money if they had to save investments they had. They were not making new investments. So we were really heartbroken about that. And we did everything we could. We looked at every type of deal that we could. But as we came to looking at, okay, Emily and I always had plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So we're working on pitching, we're working on this game, but we're also working on what's the fallback plan. And the fallback plan was, of course, our priority has always been the people and making sure everyone had soft landings. So in the end, through this process of iterating on Ash Cove, pushing the metrics, continuing to talk to people about funding it, we started putting in our backup plan, which was that Scopely was interested in hiring a good portion of the team to fill out that team I mentioned before. And that kind of came about because I had worked with several of the decision makers there when we were all at Warner Brothers. And that always really helps because you know people and you trust people. They knew our team. They knew our tech director was one of the best tech directors our tech director is the best tech director I've ever worked with. And he's the best tech director many people have ever worked with. He was in high demand. So they knew that he was amazing. They knew a bunch of our other leadership team and they knew the culture would fit. So we kept developing. We were very transparent with the team about what was happening. And then right before Thanksgiving in the fall of 2023 is when we kind of, Emily and I had spent a long time talking with each other and investors. We talked to the team and said, okay, we know that this last release was really good. We believe in the game. We wish we could finish it, but the game needs 6 more months and we just can't get funding for it. We just can't. We've done I'll tell you, I cried a lot that fall. There was a lot of crying. It was just so heartbreaking. And it clarified for me that I wanted our company to be successful, not because I wanted to make $1 billion, but because I wanted to keep making art with this amazing team of people that I love and that we worked so well together. We had several people share really big life events because I felt really safe with the team. It was just an amazing group. And that was really heartbreaking. I had brought friends of mine over from previous companies and I felt like I had really failed them. And that was really hard. We were transparent with them about how much runway we had. And then Scopely started interviewing team members and pulling the ones that they were ready to make offers to for their team. And then Emily and I were working on other conversations with other companies to get everybody landed. And I think everybody who wanted to be landed is landed at this point. There are a few people who have taken some time off, which is great, including me. I had a job offer from Scopely, which was amazing and generous. And I'm so grateful to them. But everyone in my life was telling me that I should take time off, that I was too burned out. And I just had this feeling like, I can't take time off. I've been working since I was 14. What does that mean to take time? I can't do that. That's crazy. That's irresponsible. And I talked to at least 25 people, possibly more. And I think 24 out of the 25 people just immediately were like, you should take time off, Shelby. What are you doing? And I was like, I came around to it. I'd say the number one support I have is my husband, who just was very much like, you should take time off. Don't worry. I've got this. And that was extremely generous of him and supportive. So I did eventually decide to turn that job down. And I felt like I was crazy because at that time there were, I don't know how many layoffs there were in 2023, 10,000, 20,000. I was really scared about getting another job. I have 3 kids, all these things. I was really scared, but it was the right thing. And we got everyone jobs and we had to shut down. And that was really sad. We, of course, communicated to the team and then our investors and then publicly about it. And everyone was really grateful to the transparency. We actually have a double loop social Slack that is now has none of the corporate stuff, but is just everyone who was ever at Double Loop in the last couple of years. And, we still chat and share our memes with each other. And because those are the people that I talk to 12 hours a day, every day, especially during the pandemic. So that emotional separation was really, really tough. But I'm really happy for everybody and where they've landed. Over the next couple of months, I had a couple of job offers that I was, again, really grateful for, but I did need to sort of take that time off to kind of heal my bruises. And through that whole process, like I said, in the fall, I felt so bad and guilty and like I'd failed everybody. I had this feeling no matter what anyone told me, I had this feeling okay, yeah, the market was hard, but if I was good enough, we could have made this work. If I had been able to figure it out, if I was a good enough game director, I could have, the design would have taken off. If I was a good enough business leader, we could have figured this out. There are people out there who their companies are not going out of business. So I just felt like it's hard to internalize when people tell you it's okay, it's not your fault, or you did what you could. It's hard to feel that when you are your own biggest critic. So that grieving process was really tough. And then over the next few months, I think I was able to come around to that feeling of okay, now that I know more about what was going on in the market at that time, I can let myself off the hook a little bit. I mean, I was still responsible for everybody and their livelihoods in the game and what happened to them, career-wise and financially. And so, of course, I will always be sad and about that. But I came to the point where I said, okay, I did everything I could. I do feel that way. Taking time off was not a career suicide move because I will be able to find a job. That's what I've kind of found over the last few months. And so I should take the time to breathe and do things that refill my bucket and, help me be healthy again. I'd say the last 6 months, I was hyper aware of the end date of our runway. And it was this feeling like anything I'm going to do for the company or the game to try to save it, I have to do it now because there is no later. It's like, do it now or don't do it. And I didn't know if I could save it, but I did know I needed to do everything I could. And so 6 months were intense, but I'd say the last 3 months were the most intense because we were throwing everything we had into making the milestone. We were throwing everything we had into making our next live update the best that it could be, taking big swings on the core loop and trying to work on that, managing the team, pitching, all the things. I got into a place where I was working like 13, 15 hours a day. I was sleeping like 4 hours a night, partially because I was stressed, partially because of the work. And we were in a position where it's not like you can say, okay, just hire someone. You shouldn't do that. It's like, no, we don't have the money to hire someone. I need to fundraise, manage my part of the team, and rebalance the entire economy by myself because I can't hire somebody to do that. And I did have help. I'm not saying I did that by myself at all, but there just was no one to like relieve the workload from each other. And I wanted to like leave it all on the table, put it all in, give it the biggest shot I could. But that left me extremely drained and burned out because that was not sustainable at all. And I knew that. It was sort of the last hurrah. About 2 days after we officially shut Double Loop down, I got sick. And then about 10 days later, it turned into pneumonia. And then I had pneumonia for 2.5 months, like immediately after stopping the company. And I know it's because I had just drained myself down to nothing. I was pretty frustrated to be sick and sleeping for most of the first 2 months of my sabbatical. But for whatever reason, that was actually physically healing, but also sort of emotionally healing to sort of just be forced to slow down for a little while.
Wow, what a ride. I feel like really much into, the whole journey that happened. I absorb a lot of what you shared. So some points of reflection on what you shared, just to offer some perspective. And this is where diversity plays, because you and Emily took different decisions that we don't often see in the industry. And something I noticed, for example, with a few studios founded by women, that they just own completely the decision to stop, even when sometimes they were not forced to stop. So here, I want to highlight and also praise the fact that you prioritize something that was a part of your DNA of a company, which are the teams, the people. And at some point, it took priority in the decision. You could have, burn every cent until the end, and then let's figure out what we do with the team. But you shuffled it around, and then how do we walk away from this company with pride? And I think this is exactly what you've done all the way when you realize, okay, this is a moment where it will be very difficult to go forward in the next 6 months. You already made the decision. Let's place our people, make sure that they have a nice exit. And I think that is very honorable. It's courageous, and also owning this, where a failure or success at the end of the day, yes, you have what others think of you, but you have to live with yourself, and if you cannot accept the decision you've made, I can tell you, because I have met other founders who made, with no judgment, the decision they're not proud of, and they have to live with that for the rest of their life. So I think here it's really important, the integrity of what is the right thing to do for you with your company, and you're the main judge at the end of the day. So that's the first point I wanted to raise. Second is, I can sense from the way you share about it that you gave it all you could with what you've known, with who you are. And I think that's also the best way to look back with pride. You've done everything you could, and there were many multiple factors in what makes a company successful, whatever that means, right? So letting yourself rest after. Somebody told me, like, working in games sometimes is like an addiction, you're like on adrenaline and you are like on the steroid all the time. And when you stop that, you feel like a hangover. And I think that's a bit in the rhythm we are until our body tells us stop, just stop now. So I can see some step of that cycle, like zooming out, because I've heard that story in multiple forms also from others. So just wanted to reflect on this point.
Thank you for sharing that, because you have this sort of overview pattern recognition point of view that I don't have, since you've talked to many founders. And it's just another piece in sort of my emotional journey to like understanding and contextualizing what happened and what I'm going to do in the future and all of those things. So that's really valuable to me as well to hear that.
Yeah. When I close the studio I built, it reminds me a lot of a journey I've had. What I was the proudest of was the team, I built.
Yeah.
And then how we would part ways matter as much more than so. And we stayed in touch. So I totally understand many parts of what you shared. But I think also it's again how we think psychologically, as women founding companies. That's why it's important to tell the stories, because how you close has different ways of stories that need to be covered. And it's not the typical one, but I can tell you with other women that I heard more in private conversation closing the studio, it's actually not uncommon, but we just don't hear about the story. So again, very amazing, bit like executive summary of what I've taken away, building many prototype like 27, building a game that far in soft launch, where I'm sure you had also very good metrics, just not good enough for the market with the cost of acquisition. I know that time actually, we didn't go in details like product market details. There's so much to cover. And then you pivoted very quickly. Like you said, prototyping in 2 weeks, soft launch in 5 months, which is exceptional, for casual games. So you've done a lot, build an amazing team, and that still stick together after the company doesn't exist. So a lot of things to celebrate. And I hope you remember that.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. And it was really nice. We got about half the team back together at GDC for a lunch, and it was, nothing had changed. And like you said, I am able to live with myself and be happy with what we tried. I'm very sad that it didn't work out, but I don't really have regrets about anything as far as how much I gave it and how much we tried and how much Emily and I both care about the people.
Yeah. And so as we met at GDC, you were still in the process of recovering. I mean, at the end of it, but I'm sure it was a big boost also to reconnect with the game community. And I wanted to maybe close the conversation today on what's next for you, as you have made some announcements, so I'm not going to spoil it. But it's always for me interesting when I want to avoid the word fail, because fail has judgment. But when things didn't go according to the plan, you take the learning, you recover. It's like you get a punch, in the face, you heal and you grieve, etc. Where are you now? And with the healing recovery process, what are you excited to do next that you'd like to share?
Well, I want to talk about that, but I also want to reflect back one thing you said, which I feel very strongly. I feel like everything I've ever learned in my game development career has been because something went wrong. Like you said, when you're in the middle of getting punched in the face, it's really hard to be like, this is going to be good in the end. But, with a little time, it's okay. So my whole life, I've done acting as a hobby. I started dragging my parents to theater auditions when I was in first grade. And I thought I wanted to be an actress, but I wasn't that great, to be honest. But I kept doing it. It was social and it was collaborative creativity, which turned out to be the thing I liked, which is why I worked on games. So I continued doing film as a hobby. I started working on 48-hour film projects, total hobby projects, just things you do in 48 hours, and you do it and you're done. You do it and you're done. It's like prototyping. I love that. So we moved to Portland and I didn't really know anybody here. And I started getting involved in the hobby film community here. And over the last year, even when I was so busy at Double Loop, I kept prioritizing kind of going to these meetups like once every 2 months or something. And it came to be that ended up being a huge grounding thing for me. And this process had led it up so that somehow coincidentally, we filmed my first one that I wrote and directed on the day before the last day of Double Loop. So it did sort of help me feel like I had a place that I was still being creative, but it was less pressure. So about 6 weeks ago, I started talking with someone here in Portland who we wanted to co-write something and think about it. And it came to me that I got really excited about the idea of creating a fictional narrative web series that draws from my 20 plus years of game development experience. And it's a fictional series and it's about a fictional tiny indie game dev team. The main character is about 80% autobiographical me. And right now we're in pre-production on it. We're finalizing our script. We're doing table reads. At GDC, I was able to shoot some test footage and talk about it with people. And what I've found is that even when I've put just barely any information about it on my LinkedIn or wherever, that I'm doing a film project that has a connection to games. And I said, if anyone knows film and loves games or vice versa, I could use some help. I need subject matter experts. And just like the outpouring has been amazing. It's just like hundreds and hundreds of people want to help and follow it. And I'm trying to figure out how to wrap literally hundreds of people's stories that I'm so inspired by into this series that I want to be very authentic. And it's funny, and it brings in real game dev stories and how we really do things, and shows people who aren't in game dev how we make games and what the real people are like who are making games. It's not a stereotype and not a trope. So I'm not going to be asking game devs to act, but to be themselves. And then we have this sort of fictional narrative wrapper around it. And literally just today, I incorporated my LLC for the production company for this.
Yeah, congrats. Wow. It's a new birth.
Thank you. I'm excited, but I'm super bad at resting. Like, my husband's like, really? Like, shouldn't you just like take a nap?
It's been just 2 months.
I know. And so, yeah. And I was like unconscious with pneumonia for like 2 months of that. So I'm really excited about it, because what I find is it has its own sort of momentum. People are really into it and interested. And for me, it feels fulfilling because I can use my 20 years of experience and things and stories without, I feel like it doesn't touch my burnout bruises. Like, I'm definitely not ready to start a game company or make a game immediately, because I have some real burnout and exhaustion around the idea of that. But making the film to talk about those things, for whatever reason, is energizing and not kind of triggering my burnout feelings. So I'm really excited about it. I'm trying to not let it take over my life, but it's hard for me not to do things at like 200%. But I'm excited about it, and I'll be talking a lot more about it in the future.
First, congratulations for incorporating a new business. So, that's the most concrete way of like moving forward. It's not moving on, but moving forward. When you close a chapter, there's a lot of energy associated and probably grieving process. But you come to me as a person also that is very creative and driven by creativity and energized by creative projects. So I can see the spark, the way you talk about it, even, the whole body language for people. Well, you won't see it, but I see it today. So for me, I feel very positive for you about that move. And one can say, an accelerating healing process, because what you need back is energy. It's not like not do anything. It's actually, yes, you need to rest, to recharge physical energy, but emotional energy, creative energy, you can do. All right. So I think it all makes sense from the way you talk about it, and trust yourself. It took you so far. So that sounds very exciting, and also touching, at the edge of games, telling story, untold story. I love that part, like for me. So I'm looking forward to following all of that through LinkedIn, and, maybe in the future in the podcast, please use the space also to share some of the stories. I'd love that.
Thank you. That would be amazing. We'll talk about it more publicly, but Sophie and I have been talking about some ideas on how to wrap the podcast into a show or vice versa. So that'll be really cool if we can work that out.
Yes. So let's close the conversation today. It's just missing a glass of wine, and it would have been probably the same conversation through today, because I think it's a meaningful conversation also for you to share this in a more public way, although we are in a very safe space. I'm curious to know what has emerged for you through the conversation today, and, what you would like to do with it. What have you learned today?
Well, I really appreciate you sharing the patterns you've seen and sort of trends you've seen and the experiences of game founders, specifically women game founders that you've talked to. And every bit of that I hear and can talk through with someone like you does, like I said, it contributes toward my emotional healing and feeling kind of solid in myself and what I'm doing. So that's been really valuable to hear about. I actually had not heard the part about how maternity leave can trigger these sorts of things and how and why that happens. And I would love to talk more in the future about your journey as well and what you've been through and where you're at. It was really helpful for me to talk about this stuff with you and for you to reflect some of the themes back, because I know then that it makes sense to you and that people are rooting for us and care about us, and that we're not just the sum of our successes and failures. And I don't believe we are at all. We're people that we all are trying to make creative, amazing things together. And the industry is so supportive, and you've been so supportive, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Shelby. And I'm sure we have other episodes and we can reverse, the roles and we can do an episode where you interview me if you like and practice your interview podcast skills.
That'd be great.
Yeah. Well, that's it for today. Thank you very much, Shelby. And I look forward to hearing more about your film stories in the future.
Thanks, Sophie.
Thanks for listening to this latest episode of the Rise and Play podcast. I am growing a community of conscious leaders across the industry and beyond. If you want to join this movement, please share the podcast with other conscious leaders because we have so much more we can learn from each other. If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow and rate the show on Spotify or your other favorite podcast platform. It will help other growing leaders to discover the show and benefit from the valuable insights. If you would like to grow rapidly your leadership skills, you can find more insights on riseandplay.io, where you will also find my free masterclass on conscious leadership and other resources that I offer. Have a great week and remember to take care of yourself. Until the next time,